Right then, hello friends, and welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers podcast. My name is Chris Armstrong. Tonight I'm joined by regular Russell,
Hello.
semi-regular Callum Akehurst-Ryan,
Hello.
and new to the pod but definitely a peer, Leigh Rathbone.
A brand new hello.
Lovely, thank you very much, chaps. Now, tonight we're going to be speaking about no testers, no problem. But before we dive into that, Callum's going to hit us with some banter. Callum.
Given that this is a topic that is very rife within the testing and also the engineering community at late, I was very interested about the world of AI, and thus I put it to you all fine peers, which is your favourite fictional AI? Obviously, I shall go first. I do have a favourite, given that I am a tester and I do enjoy musical theatre. My favourite fictional AI is GLaDOS, the star and antagonist of the Portal gaming series, who runs a testing facility and puts mere humans through a series of tests and also sings about that at the end. If you were in the internet in about 2006 or 7, you'll probably remember the song Still Alive. But how about the rest of you? Chris, why don't you kick us off?
Mine's less deep, or less interesting for folks, but I'm going to say my favourite fictional AI would probably be Intelligence from Team America World Police.
A very good one. I enjoyed that one. Leigh, what about yourself?
I'm not sure many people will actually know this one, but it's if you think about why The Simpsons was created, Simpsons was yellow for a reason, weren't they? Because they wanted people to stop when they were flicking through the channels. Well, this had that impact on me, but way before The Simpsons, and it was Max Headroom. So if you've heard of Max Headroom, in my head, I can't quite remember. I'm pretty sure he or it had its own TV show in the late 80s. And it was an AI, but he had like a stutter or a stammer, but it was on purpose. And he was just really controversial and he was brutal in his interviews. And yeah, that's what I remember because flicking through the channels, you could always see when it was on the screen because the bright colours and just the way it spoke.
That's amazing. Thank you. And go on, Russell. Hit us with your one.
Well, before I do that, the Max Headroom rings bells to me because there was former CTO or a CEO of a company I worked for that was likened to Max Headroom in
Oh
terms
my
of the way he
God.
looked and all the rest of it. So yeah, so that just rings bells now. I was like, oh yeah. So I was torn. So Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Deep Thought was one, but thinking about it, as you do while people talk, it hit me Terminator. I think Terminator is a great one. Not Skynet, because obviously that's the evil AI, but Terminator because it was evil, then became good. So that's what I'm going for.
Amazing. There you go. Thanks, everyone. So, yes, favorite AIs. And those listening, what's your favorite AI?
Very nice, very thoughtful. I look forward to hearing all the feedback from the lovely listeners. So, moving on to this, we're going to be talking about no testers, no problem. Now, Leigh, you're the one that sort of proposed this idea. Do you want to just give us a little opening tidbit for us to be able to grow upon?
Yeah, we were speaking about trends before we started the recording. And if you remember my talk at PeersCon, I did talk about trends. And one of those trends is or has been companies saying we don't need testers, QAs, QEs. And then that trend seemed to have grown. And I think personally it stopped now. And I'm not seeing many companies now saying we don't need testers. But for this group and for this podcast, I wanted to delve deeper into why we think it became a trend. I've already said I think it's ending, but I am interested in your views as to whether you think it's sort of over as a trend. And Callum, I think you're going to bring to life your story about the role you're going into, and that'd be fascinating because I've done that twice before as well. I'm not going to put the spoiler in there. I'll let you describe what's coming. But I have actually worked for two companies where I was brought in as an engineering manager that had no testers, and they deliberately said to me, we don't want you to come in to set up the testing departments. We're bringing you in as an engineering manager because you've got that lens, that testing background, but please don't start coming in and banging the drum about setting up a testing department. So that's what led to me suggesting this as a title and a topic to discuss.
I can jump in with some thoughts initially. And from what I've seen, and as Leigh said, I've worked for a couple of startups and organizations historically where I've been like the first tester through the door or one of the first testers through the door. And what I've seen is a lot of organizations want to hit the ground running, and they think about, especially CTOs that come from a development background or engineering teams that come from a development background. They usually sort of like dive into the how are we going to get this developed. They think about the how, and they're not so much thinking about the what and the why so much. And there's an assumption which comes from a lot of development cultures, it comes from a lot of comp sci degrees as well, that there's a lot of certainty in development. And the idea of uncertainty, where risks could be and where testing really helps, isn't really considered all that much. So there's still that view within engineering organizations and even enterprise organizations that why do we need testers? What are they bringing to the table? Our developers can write unit tests and tick off the things that they're building anyway, or won't make mistakes because we'll tell them what to build. So one of the big issues that I've seen is the immaturity of some development teams, some engineering cultures lends itself to a lack of thinking about testing or not understanding even what testing can bring to the table. I don't know if that resonates with anyone.
Can't see it, but I'm nodding profusely. It completely does. I've worked in places, and I work somewhere probably currently that has a mixture in terms of some areas and quite commonly has testers and some areas don't. And it's historical understandings or beliefs, I think, that have spawned that culture. There's belief that testers can only test software, for example. They wouldn't be involved in building platforms, testing platforms work. So I've seen different worlds and different places where people come into it and people don't. And it does come from prejudices, biases, different motivations, not understanding what's possible, to your point, Callum. And I think it's interesting that quality is something everyone expects to be intrinsic. You don't go buy a house and expect to have to pay extra to get it quality. You pay for a service, you expect quality built into it, which is true. But quality isn't just from the builders. There's inspections, there's rules, there's regulations, there's foremen, there's different people that come into these things using that analogy. Different people help build it. You check the work as it goes, you check the alignment, you use a line to make sure that your brickwork's level and so on and so forth. You use tools, and that could be a tester or it could be testing tools. Doesn't necessarily mean the person. So there's lots of different things that we do, but no one really wants to pay for it, and it's expected. But actually, in reality, everything we buy, there's some form of quality control. Go to shops, you buy a packet of bread buns. There's a form of quality assurance that happens. They may not check every bread bun, but they're checking certain numbers. There's certain quality control measures that go into place. So it is paid for as part of services, but it's hidden. So there's a loathing to, no one really wants to pay for it when you're the guy with the budget. Well, I'm being a bit harsh. A lot of people don't want to pay for it. I think I'll frame it rather than no one wants to pay for it.
It's often looked at as a cost, isn't it? Testing
It's a cost sake
rather than
a
something
benefit.
that creates money for the company. It's a cost.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they often say, well, anyone can test. And theoretically, anyone can test. But
Anyone can build software.
we've said the same thing about building software, about being a chef, about being a race car driver. Anyone can, but it takes skill, it takes nous training, experience, all those sorts of intuitions and things to become sort of elite professional quality at those sorts of things. And I think there's often these sorts of conversations where folks go, well, if anyone can test, that's great. Maybe I've got a team in my context full of brilliant product people, brilliant engineers, brilliant designers, scrum masters, who all can test and can embody quality without a tester. That's possible, right? But to then say that context can be then replicated and duplicated, I think is a problem that we see industry-wide, not just about testers, but about here's a context that is brilliant and wonderful, and that did away with that thing that we see as a cost.
What I tend to see as well within a lot of engineering organizations that are going on this journey is that as things move from hypothetical to actually practical, that's when you tend to get a lot more engagement, and engineering teams actually start crying out and asking for quality champions and testers as well. So it's perceived as a cost, to your point there, Chris. When it's seen as hypothetical, you can't justify that cost. But as things start maturing and as the team starts to understand what it doesn't know, as those unknown unknowns become a bit more fleshed out of known unknowns, let's say, to go back into the old what we know about things, you tend to actually get engineers calling out and wanting testers in their organizations. And that's usually the time when I've joined organizations because the engineers have wanted people
It's a great point, Cal. And if I can just roll back and then roll to the present, I've got two things that tie in there. First of all, when I went to this company as an engineering manager, I asked the people that started the tech team, why are you so against having testers? And basically, they'd been burnt back in the 2014s, 2015s. The bottleneck, the gatekeepers, you can't pass go unless you've met these criteria. And they said QA slowed us down. So when they had the opportunity to start their own tech teams, they went, right, we're not going to have people that slow us down. So some companies said we don't need BAs, right? There's an example. I've worked with a company that had no BAs because BAs slow us down. In this instance, it was testers. But here's a great tie back to what you've just said, Callum. One of the tech leads from the company where I was engineering manager is now working with me in my current company, Cavu. And he came out with a great statement this week because I couldn't give him a QA this week. I had to pull his QA out of his squad for another priority reason. And I said, but Pete, you've worked in a company that didn't have QAs before. So why now are you coming to me and saying, please don't take my QA? And he came out with a great answer. He said, we can get those tickets into Dunley, but I now know, having worked in both environments, we will get the tickets into Dun, but I bet you bottom dollar there'll be more bugs in it when it goes live. And he said, we can accept that as a risk. He said, but there will be more bugs in it, Lee. I know that now. I didn't know that back then. So the trend was the tech teams were formed by people burnt in the 2014s, 2015s. But I now think because the QE, the testing, the QA community have all changed, we've upskilled, our skills are very different from 10 years ago. I think now people really value our value added. And those people now, those engineers working with testers, their mindsets going forward, when they go to set up tech companies, their mindsets will be the modern tester's mindset. They'll see the value, not like it was 10 years ago when we bottlenecks and we were saying, no, you can't pass here. We are the gatekeeper. So I think it's gone full circle now.
It speaks a lot to what's expected or what's needed from the testing community now, because you like engineers are quite right. If it's just about the bottleneck stuff, which is basically confirming what everybody already knows, the certainty of things that you're mentioning there, Lee, like, yeah, you can use unit tests or, component tests or service tests to sort of check that functionality, and someone can spin up something and look at it. Test championing and modern testing is about helping people understand what they don't even know. And those bugs, I assure you, will be in things that haven't been documented as acceptance criteria or requirements. It'll be things that like edge cases or non-functional areas, or does this actual code work with this thing 5 services removed? And that's where testers have to be thinking and have to be more on the ball with such a holistic view of testing. We really do end up with this kind of situation where sometimes testers are synonymous with automation testers, and it's, well, I've already got automation testers in my developers, why do I need more?
I think there's definitely a trend to what Lee is saying, which is the more the people that are making decisions on what team, what structures, what organizational design is, are incorporating the need for testers in the modern sense. You still do, and I've come across this, have people that aren't of that modern ilk, that do still see testers and the bottlenecks and the process constraints and the waterfall-esque models of kind of controls and checks and things like that. There's a mixture, but I think the trend is definitely more towards the benefits it can bring versus the constraints it blocks. And that's in part from what testers are doing. And it is about testers upskilling and knowledge sharing and doing things and looking at how they can enable quality versus gatekeep quality in many ways. And that gatekeeper mentality, that protect production at all costs type model that often comes out, run every test ever made ever, and all these sorts of logics that people shout and scream about, they are some of the things that have given us a bad reputation. And I've seen it in terms of change management. It's not just testers. This has happened to you. Talk with BAs. If you spend 300 months trying to get the perfect requirement, and guess what? They're seen as a bottleneck. We can't start work because the BAs are 6 months later still working on requirements. We can't release code because change management won't let us do a deployment, and there's a 3-week delay to get a shipment of something out the door. Yet all these things put people off. And I think there is a cultural shift, this kind of, I'm not going to say continuous delivery and deployment, but more to getting things out there safely, getting feedback on it, getting in front of users. People are starting to see the value of that. And actually, more and more people are singing that and trying to get to it. The nirvana is the path, which helps back up. And one of the, we're calling this testers rather than using QE or QA or test engineer or any of these other sort of analogies, is because testers is evolving and how it influences quality. It is becoming more of a quality than purely testing. Testing is one of the techniques we can use. It's not the only one. Testers are growing their breadth of influence. Once upon a time, it was just execute a test. It is far more than that now.
I was going to sort of push into that a little bit, thinking that I don't know about you, but for me, my perception of testing has changed over the years. My perception of development and where I fit and what my role is and what I need to protect and what my responsibility is. All of those things have changed, and I used to just think my role was to catch bugs and compliance. Leo know this, and as well Callum, computer games, we were there to catch the bugs and make sure that we could get through compliance and we could release stuff. That's what we were there for. But then this little thing called Agile trickled down into my life, and suddenly there were fewer testers, and yet we got to shape the quality of the product. And it was the first time that quality was something that I was a part of, even though it had been my job title for a few years. That was a big moment for me. Then there was like automation. It's like, well, automation is going to solve all the problems. So isn't that great? There's some really cool dev kits. And so therefore, automation for me at that time became the definition of quality. And I saw it as the be all end all. And then again, these things sort of they go through cycles, and you see some inspirational people talking about things. You see folks going, "Oh, we don't need this and we don't need that," and you begin to sort of buy into this new trend. And I always feel like, in some automation, you can have like a rendezvous where you'll have a bunch of things running in parallel, and there'll be a stop where you're waiting for other things to catch up. I feel like we're almost at a bit of a critical mass where a bunch of things have sort of all come up and aligned at the same point, and where we're seeing like quality engineering is big conversation stuff at the moment, right? There's been a few outages and things where people have gone, how did the testers miss this sort of thing? Testers are way more technically capable than they've probably ever been in the history of testing. Technology is way more complex and diverse than it's ever been. And actually, you could put the four of us in the exact same role and we could all do it, but we do it differently. And this is kind of the way things go. But I think the more aware we are of things, the more we have these thought leaders, but also just real normal people sharing experiences and learning their lessons and sort of pressing forward and saying, hey, actually, maybe we're wrong. Maybe we should experiment. Maybe it's all right to take that step back from that thing that I thought was gospel once upon a time and to try these other things. It's all right to be wrong. Lee is nodding away.
It's brilliant, Chris, because I've been thinking this, and when you said protection a couple of minutes ago, I actually brought up the Gollum My Precious picture that I had in a talk in 2016, because that was the mindset of testers back then. It was like, no, 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 I'm precious about the testing. I'm going to do it because if there's anything that gets found in live, it's me that gets the blame. We've evolved, and we've spoken about roles that go through trends. PMO is a great one. The program management office was very rife in the early 2010s, and then they got rid of them because they slowed projects and agile down. And now they're making a reemergence. Project managers are making a reemergence. Test managers are making a reemergence. And to tie into what you're saying there, Chris, I think the world now has got through that everything has to be pure agile and everything has to be to the Scrum Alliance rule book and all that stuff. Everyone's just going, well, actually, let's do what we need to get our product out. And yes, we might need a PMO. We might not need BAs. We might need testers, or we might need BAs and no testers. But they're getting more comfortable being a little bit different and doing what's needed for the best of the company rather than following a trend. We've stopped following all the trendsetters, I think. And we've got to a point now where we're just saying, look, what does our company need?
To speak on that, when it comes to testing, I don't think that the industry at large understands that testers have been going on the journey that Chris and yourself there have been talking about. I think the view of what testers are is mired back in that view of 2007 or up to whenever, where it was the gates, the my precious kind of thing. And people think of testers as just unskilled labor who tick things off. as an industry, and I think we know this, is we're really bad at explaining what we can do and what we bring to the table. If you ask like 10 testers like what their job title is or what they do, you get 10 different answers, and they're all a variant of I don't want to call myself a manual tester, for example. I don't think people understand what we bring to the table, and thus they don't know they want a tester. And I can see, Leigh, you're excited to talk.
Well, that intro thing you've just mentioned there, Callum, we've run an exercise internally on how to introduce yourself that makes you stand out from the crowd, but gets across what job you have without saying it. So, you've got to get across what you do, but don't say what it is you do. So I'm trying to coach testers that work for me to be able to go sat around a pool and say something that you do and sound interesting. Go to a conference full of testers and stand out. Go to a party and be the center of attention because people find you so interesting. Because I don't know about you, in the past, I've always gone, oh, I'm just a tester. And then everybody turns around and finds somebody else to talk to at the party or around the pool. Everybody boasts about what they do, and you go, oh, I work in tech, or I'm a tester, and everyone swims away in the pool, don't they? Because it's like, what the hell is that? I'm trying to coach. We've had several sessions with the senior QAs that work for me on how to introduce yourself with real power, with a real difference that adds an oomph to the room that makes people go, tell me more. So when you said that kind of about introducing yourself, that's why I got excited. I was like, oh my God, we've just spent like 2 coaching sessions on this.
It's something that's been top of mind for me because where I was on a job hunt, one of the key things that I had to do was sell myself to organizations. And a lot of it was trying to market myself in a way of like, what can I do for you? Right. Well, I can help dispel uncertainty so you don't find problems here. I can set a strategy and coach and train people on testing. It was very much I can give you this, because just by saying I am a senior tester, a principal tester, a staff engineer, it wasn't evident what I do because the roles and understanding around what testing isn't standard.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the topic of the podcast, which is no testers, is that okay? Can the world still exist? I'll tell you, one of the companies where I went in as engineering manager that had no testers and said, Leigh, listen, we don't want any. They did stuff really, really well. I was gobsmacked. It was one of the reasons I went in and applied because I wanted to see how they bloody well did it. Now, they did everything from greenfield. So I think that's one of the factors. When you can spin up a company from scratch, you can build foundations and give them the time to build the right foundations. They were given all that time and they built everything right, all the automation, all the observability. And then they activated the company to do exploratory testing. So they did mobbing or ensemble on a big, big scale to get all the what ifs and all the unknown unknowns. But when I came away, I thought, wow, that's fascinating what they've done. And I just sat there in admiration as to how they'd done it. And not many Priority Ones live came in. Very, very impressive. Has anybody here come across that as well?
We have friend of the podcast, Stuart Crocker, is head of engineering, where he's working, and he went in as head of quality engineering initially, and they have hired no testers, no QEs, but they have enabled quality within their development processes. They have done ensembling, they have done swarming, they have done testing to a high level without testers or quality engineers. So absolutely it's possible. But we've seen folks say this worked here and people go, well, I can do that here too, right?
Yeah, must admit, I've never seen it, but I believe in it, if that makes any sense. Because again, it's all like the right foundations. If you can actually build the right foundations, put the right control, the who matters less than the what. But the what is important. Quality doesn't just come of hope. It's come from practice, experience, knowledge, processes, different ways of working, like how you engineer good software, how you build good code. It's not just people type away at it. There's structure, there's form, there's models, there's patterns. Same goes for testing. We haven't really called it that. We haven't got like OOPS model for testing, for example. But in reality, that's kind of what there is. I don't want to use a testing triangle pyramid thing because I think that's got a lot of anti-patterns built within it. But we've got limited things. And I guess as testers, there's probably more we can do to help non-testers do good quality.
To speak to what I've seen, when it comes to what you're saying there. And just to speak a bit to what you were talking about there, Russell, as well. I've seen the good and the bad. And what that tends to come from is where you have senior engineers, they remember to build the quality in. My experience and what I've seen is that the more junior engineers, they really focus on the how. They treat it a bit like a university project. They just go for it, hammer and tongs. Let's get this out. Let's put this out there. And they want to be coding. You find a lot of people who want to be doing the thing, not talking about the thing. They want to do it. And the much more senior engineers at organizations are usually the ones who go, let's plan this. Let's think about it. What could go wrong? Let's design and architect things. And that's where the quality gets built in. So when I've seen without testers, it working and quality being built in a lot more has been where the organization skews to having those seniors to mentor people through things. And it's similar to having a testing champion. You've got an engineer that's seen it, that's done it, that knows where the pitfalls are and can help alleviate those. Similarly, a tester knows about risks and can support and alleviate some of those issues that come along as well.
Yeah, it's all culture, isn't it? And context. So context is if you're comfortable with going to market and your software isn't going to kill anyone, you want to make some quick bucks, and quality may not be your number one priority, then actually, yeah, I'm comfortable with companies setting themselves up for that if they just want to do that quick bucks, make a, so, when the explosion of games came out on phones and games were appearing out of nowhere and you'd install it and it'd load and after 5 seconds it would just explode. It was like you wouldn't get past the go. But they didn't care. That throwaway mentality that we've seen in the clothing industry and in the gaming industry on phones that exploded in 2010, I think we've gone past that. I really do. I don't sense that anymore. But it is still about context. It really is 100%.
Yeah.
And culture within the company.
You hit something there, which I think is startups, because what you just described about trying to see if an idea actually works. It's far better to get an idea out there that's sketchy and see if it works than it is to put in the perfect quality processes around it and it doesn't work. So alphas, trying to get experiments, those sorts of that culture of features, ideas, you can be a bit more disposable with them. You can lower the quality bar because you're trying to learn something. You're not trying to polish something. And I guess, again, it does depend on context. So where I've heard more of no QA involved, it has been more startups. And then they have added them in later with success or limited success at times.
And you're right, that sort of cultural like ownership stuff is actually quite nice in a startup feeling as well, isn't it? Because everyone kind of knows the product no matter which hat they're wearing at that given time. You would like to think, Callum, I know you're thinking these things. But what I was going to just quickly say was if we go back to one of our favorite acronyms of ERACI, the reason why I bring that up is because we like to say things like quality is everyone's responsibility, but the danger we have is when everyone else has things that maybe they're judged by, that are their primary core JD type elements, things that they feel they're judged on. Maybe they've got a bonus or an OKR or a KPI, something related to that. And if quality is not under that R column for them, if they are not responsible for that explicitly by someone, then quality will become secondary, tertiary, whatever. And if we haven't got that champion of quality, it doesn't have to be a person, but if we haven't got quality being championed in an organization, it will eventually subside and quality will certainly fall.
And I was going to speak to that because I've worked in startups. So I've seen this firsthand, what tends to happen. Although context matters, and we might think that the end product as an alpha build can be have a lower quality bar. Its version of good enough is lesser because we're putting it out to market, right? But what we're forgetting is that we build on that. Most of the time, when we go to scale up from startup, it's probably the same code base that we're building on. And if we haven't thought about things like performance or security, you might have to then take time to re-architect that you hadn't planned for. And then the engineers themselves, it's probably the same engineers that are building those things. But what haven't they been doing for all that time during alpha? building in a quality mindset, building in a quality culture. So although on the surface, we can say we can get away without thinking about testing, thinking about quality in that sense, it still does come back round. It's just a much longer feedback loop to see it, because your immediacy of get the alpha out the door, people like it, now let's build. No one's ever starting again from scratch. You're building on something. So it's worth remembering that as well.
I had two experiences of going into a startup. One was in 2001, and the engineers didn't want me in the company. They put me at a desk facing the wall, right? And I thought, I'm not having that. So I moved my desk within a couple of days. But one of them said to me, we don't need you. There's no bugs in our software. So after 3 days, I produced a spreadsheet with about 70 issues on the website that I'd found. Now, I don't like that attitude in this day and age, but in 2001, I had to find a hook to show that I could add some value. But the other contrast was in 2020, so another 19 years on, I walk into a startup and I was welcomed with open arms by the engineers. Absolutely welcomed. They could not have been more welcoming, more sharing, more pairing, and more caring.
Because they really want to build a good product. They care so much, and they're begging for testers to come in and help them to shape that. It's an amazing environment when you get it.
So what's our conclusion then? I'm just curious. So our conclusion is it depends.
Yeah.
I think it's about right, isn't it? That's definitely a testing peers conclusion, if ever I've heard of one.
It is, but if I would add to that, yes, it depends, but it absolutely needs to be on your agenda at the forefront of your mind and something that you monitor iteratively, because it's not one of those things where you can go, oh, well, we're sorted, and then just leave it, because we know that if you publish something and have a fixed bit, everything else moves and changes over time. Whatever you start on today, don't stubbornly stick to those things. Context changes, people changes, industry, technology changes. Keep quality at the center of your mind and your thoughts, and your approaches and your processes, and then you'll be on the path to success.
It needs to be an informed decision to not include quality champions or testers specifically, as opposed to just a throwaway thought about cost. You need to know what you're getting, especially in the modern times, versus what you might be losing by not having a tester. So context matters, but also making an informed decision based on your context matters.
Knowing what they bring.
Yeah. And for me, I would say that every company has a unique blend of culture, skills, people, tech stacks, history. So that's why it's all okay to have different approaches. And I'm no longer Gollum. I'm no longer precious about companies that don't have testers, because I've worked in them and I've seen the reasons why. And I'm okay. There's enough stuff out there for us to add value to. I'm okay if a company has too many testers. I'm okay if a company has no testers. I don't judge anymore, because I know inside that company there's a valid reason why they're doing it the way they're doing it.
That is a good thing to end on. Thank you, Lee. Thank you for joining us once again. We have been the Testing Peers. If you would like to reach out to us, feedback on this episode or any other episodes that you've heard, or give us ideas, you can reach us at contactus@testingpeers.com. If you're interested in our Testing Peers conference, PeersCon 2025 is the 13th of March 2025 in Nottingham. Tickets are available from our website, and by the time this goes out, we'll probably call for papers for anyone interested in submitting to join us as well. So thank you for listening.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Good night.
Goodbye.